Hey everybody, it's Dale Jr. back again for another episode of the Dale Jr. Download here in the Bojangles studio. We got a great guest coming on today. Ray Evernham is coming by to tell us all about this new book that he wrote. I've wanted to have Ray come back on for some time to talk about, obviously, this book that he's wrote and a lot of honest, opinions about his life, setting the record straight on some things, and we're going to hear all about that. But also the SRX. What happened there? Ray's been, very limited on information about what went down. He's definitely wanting to share what his opinion is of that whole situation. And he has, wore this hat here, IROC hat, because he's starting the IROC back up. What does that even mean? I haven't heard from Ray on exactly what his vision is. So we'll get to talk about that with Ray when we bring him in here. I want to thank Ally for sponsoring the guest segment and bringing us all our great guests like Ray to the show. Ally is such a great supporter of the Dale Jr. Download, but also all things racing. Like, they're doing so much in the NASCAR industry to not only being a primary sponsor on Bowman's car, running ads throughout our broadcasts, but doing all kinds of great, unique things within the sport that I love. So thank you, Ally. It's awesome to always have an ally in your corner, and they're a great one for us here at the Dale Jr. Download. So let's get Ray in the room and let's get this started.
Hey, man. What's up, pal? Yeah. Oh, boy. New old stock.
New old stock?
Good to see you. I like that hat.
Yeah. Figured I'd wear it today.
Perfect.
Whoa. Ray comes in. How you doing, Ray?
I'm doing good. Good.
Ray walks into the studio and hands me a die-cast IROC car, new old stock. This is old. This is original.
Yeah.
Looking like maybe 87, something like that. But where did this come from?
So when we announced that we had got the IROC marks and we're gathering stuff, a lot of fans are right there said, hey, a guy sent us a whole case of he said, I got some old stuff, want you guys to have it so you could use it. So
that's insane.
We brought one for you because we've got some cool stuff around.
Yeah, I love that. All right, man. Well, Ray, I'm glad you're here. Looking forward to getting your opinion on some of the things going on in the sport. But first off, just fresh off the Daytona 500, did you pay attention to what was going on over there?
I did. And, big weekend for Hendrick Motorsports, as you know, for Mr. Hendrick, 40 years. And to see the 24 on the 24 and see how happy they were. You look at how long Rick Hendrick and Linda Hendrick have been doing this, and last night meant a lot to them. You could see it in their face. Yeah,
I was surprised they all came out across the grass or out toward William at the car. That's how you celebrate, right? You kind of make it your own. I know William's going to do the front straightaway interview and the burnout or anything else he wants to do, but at Daytona, man, you take it in. You allow the team to come out there and celebrate with you in that moment before you go to victory lane, right, and have the more proper celebration. So that was kind of cool seeing them all out there right around his front straightaway interview.
Well, and you know what it feels like when that checkered flag falls at that place, and you've won that.
Yeah,
man, it's like all of a sudden you're a stock car racer.
Yeah.
William Byron. He's going to go on and do tremendous things, but that will be he'll remember that one forever.
Yeah, you'll see. I know he will because he'll see it. Images and video for the rest of his life, right? Moment when we come back to Daytona, they'll have promo reels and all types of things, and they'll drop that little nugget in there, his celebration or an image of him in victory lane. And so the rest, I told him after the race, I said, forever a 500 champion, because the rest of your life you'll be recognized and see those, be reminded by that moment. One of the reasons why you're here today is because you just recently released a book.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me that it's an autobiography called Trophies and Scars. And you told me repeatedly, you're like, man, this is the most honest version of my life that I could possibly give. What was the reason behind doing a book now?
I feel like I wanted my family, my children, and the people who are close to me, and the people who have helped me along the way that really didn't get to take that journey with me, but if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have made all those steps in the journey. I wanted them to know really who I am, who they helped me become, and what I was thinking, and know that I was evolving with each step, right? I'm not the same person I was if you raced against me 40 or 50 years ago, but, I met so many people along the way that have taught me so many things, and, it's just like that old Willie Nelson song, I got a long list of reasons for all the things I've done, and I just wanted those people to know that they made a difference, and I wanted my family to really understand what I was thinking when I wasn't with them.
Yeah. What were some of the moments in the book that you wrote about that were a relief, right, to get off your? So I've had an opportunity myself to do this and put some of my experiences in a public forum, and there is moments where you're like, man, I can't wait for people to read this part because it will either explain a lot, or you're able to get something off your chest that you've been harboring or something that's bothered you. And so what is a moment or some moments where you're like, man, this is important for me to share?
Well, I think some of it in the early days when I didn't know how much I didn't know, it was, I was always making excuses about why I was getting beat or, why what. And I had a realization when I had that fire at Martinsville and had to race Tony Siscone the next year, 1983. And Tony, fantastic guy, and
what happened in that bit?
In Halloween Day, 1982, right? Cardinal 500, they used to run modifieds and late models. Yes. Well, we kept blowing tires out and hit the wall, and Tony hit me in the back, didn't see me. Another car was right in front of me. Big fire. And Tony got burned bad. I got burned, he got burned, but he got burned bad with his hands and whatnot. And, we both came back to race 1983. We go at Wall Stadium, and Tony's got his hands are burned horribly. He can barely do anything but hold the steering wheel, right? And the championship comes down to me and him. The last night, we're racing for the championship, and he beat me. And I never forgot that because I thought, here's a guy that I always thought, he had the best cars, he had life easy, he had all these things going for him. That's why he beat me all the time. And I realized, no, he beat me because he really wanted it, and he wasn't out partying and drinking, and carrying on and working on the car half-assed like I was a lot. And right then and there, I decided I needed to go and make sure I could do this, find out how to do it. And that's when I left racing full-time and went to IROC. And that was a huge turning point in my life. And the other thing that I really get into is the day that I left Hendrick, which was incredibly hard for me. I don't think a lot of people really understood what I was going through there, but I was really honest about that stuff. And you look back and think, man, are there things I could have handled differently, or what was I feeling, or what would have really worked out? So those two things in the book are really honest and changed my direction of life. Is
there a so thinking that makes me wonder, let's, for example, take the Hendrick, the day you left Hendrick. Is there a person in that experience that you hope reads the book and maybe can mend fences, or someone might say, you're hoping that a specific person reads this and goes, man, I'm really glad I learned this. Right now, I see this from his perspective. I didn't know that Ray felt this way. Is there a specific person?
Well, it's funny you should ask that because, Jeff Gordon and I had never really had that conversation.
Really?
Really. We talk, you talk on surface and stuff, and everybody's always a little bit protective, but I talked to him about what I was feeling. I showed him the chapter, and, he's like, man, I didn't know. And so I'm glad it was him, and I'm hoping that Rick takes, reads it and understands it. But really everybody at Motorsports, because I want them to know how that felt. And I think you go through that sometimes with family when you have to make a decision for yourself, and you have to leave your family or your friends, or you do whatever. And it was a lot more like that because, Hendrick, I look at that, they're still my family, right? Yeah. Still family. And I hope that everyone there at least understands what I was thinking, right or wrong, because sometimes even though as you explain it, you got to make a decision and move on. But that one hurt.
Yeah. And so that's interesting. You and Jeff, when you decide to leave, you and him did not communicate much about that decision, and he was left to assume, right? And then I'm sure part of him was frustrated because of how successful y'all had been, but also from what I've read in the book, there was a sense of y'all were at a crossroads, right? Performance-wise, communication-wise, y'all weren't, roses and rainbows, right, and winning champion. There was some tug of war going on between the two of y'all, correct?
Yeah, and we had grown, right? We talk about how people evolve, and when I met Jeff, he was 18 years old, and he needed the kind of crew chief that I was, about this and that. Now, I didn't really tell him how to drive, but I, talked to him on the car, talked to him about this, and this, and man, he was already 3-time champion. Had won at that time. He was one of the biggest names in their sports. It was him and your dad, right? That was it, right? And then they were the guys, and he, it just didn't fit what he needed anymore, and I didn't know how to do anything else.
So that's so interesting to me, because I feel like that Jimmy and Chad sort of got to the same place. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy and I talked a little bit one time, and he's like, I'm thinking about splitting up. And I'm like, how many more years are you going to run? Now, I know Jeff was young. He had a lot of years left. But I was thinking, man, why would you want, if you're just going to run a couple years, why would you want to ruin this sort of dynasty that y'all are, right? Just go through the next couple of years arguing and fighting and just finish it, right? But how being so successful together, it's sort of similar to David Pearson and the Wood brothers, right? They could have figured that out, right? The split that I come to the realization that split was unnecessary. Had they sat down and had a conversation, they likely would have continued to work together, at least for the remainder of that year. Why do you feel like you're this accomplished championship crew chief that everybody in the garage looks at and goes, this guy knows his stuff. I wish he was working on my car. How come you were no longer a fit? How could that possibly happen?
Well, there were, and honestly, you know how this happens too. There were people in our lives on both sides that were kind of pulling us in different directions and talking them, hey, this or that, and that starts you thinking, and that started us questioning each other on what our priorities were or whatnot. And I think that once that crack opens, somebody opens that crack. Yeah. And you got to remember how fast everything happened for us too. I tell everybody, look, I went from laying on my back at Flemington, changing gears in the dirt, to Cup champion in 3 years. Yeah. And I think that happened to Jeff too. And as I said, there you get a lot of people pulling you in different directions. And again, you continue to evolve, you continue to learn. Had we known now, I think Rick Hendrick says no way, but I think that a milk and cookies could have fixed it. But I also think that maybe Rick learned that when Jimmy and Chad were talking about splitting, that hey, I need to get in and talk to these guys.
Do you think Rick wished he would have stepped in? Maybe you've had conversations with him.
Oh yeah. And again, you can't have any more respect for anybody on the planet than I've got for Rick Hendrick.
Could Rick have talked you into staying?
I think he could, because he's one of the few people that I would have listened to that would have got me to think about the right things at that time.
I'm saying the Dodge deal, the opportunity that you had to create this magnificent, organization, which it was, right? It became really an incredible thing. You think he could have convinced you to stick around for a while?
I think he absolutely could have, because Rick could have provided all those opportunities for me. And the Dodge people were great to me, because I don't want to think that, hey, that wasn't a great experience.
Right. No, it was great.
I learned so much. But you look back in the end and think, okay, Rick could have provided those opportunities for me. He could have done it. But Rick will tell you, he's probably told you the same thing. look, a good deal is a good deal for everybody. Worked out good for Hendrick because it actually, I think in some ways, showed them a path to grow and be stronger. And then it let me expand and grow and be stronger, because when you jump into a deal like that, you don't know how much you don't know. And I'm going to tell you, when I jumped into being a car owner, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to be a crew chief and just own everything. Surprise.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. But, the good news is it turned out really good, and I think it's actually made Jeff and I and Rick Hendrick closer.
How did you and Jeff start the conversation of, coming to terms with it? When did that begin?
We didn't really talk that well until, we started, when I went back to Hendrick in 14, 15, we started, working together a little bit again, and I was enjoying it. It was good, working with them. But I really think that the NASCAR Hall of Fame brought us together a lot, because you have time, you're reflecting on your career, and then you realize how important he was to me and I was to him, and he went out of his way for his Hall of Fame induction to make me feel like part of his family, and
that's a big deal.
Big deal. It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And I think right then and there we were just back like brothers.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So, talking about the evolution of as a crew chief, laying in the dirt, changing gears, and a championship crew chief 3 years later. I'm fascinated by when you think about, I've been able to watch Chad Knaus sort of have a similar experience. A lot of crew chiefs do this, right? You look at these guys and you think about where they came from. How do you evolve from journeyman, working his tail off modified guy, going, you go through IROC, working with Kawicki for a little while, very short period of time, then Dave Marcus and different things, right? Doing all sorts of stuff. How does that guy turn into somebody who is so prominent, iconic, well-respected in like, take yourself back to your peak in the Cup garage as a crew chief for Jeff Gordon. You're orchestrating this team into a championship team. You're in control of Jeff Gordon, who's an incredible talent. And from the exterior, you look like a guy who is who knows exactly how he prepared, exactly what his next step is, exactly ready for anything that's coming at him. You carried yourself with such confidence, right? But you weren't that person 3 years ago. How did that happen? How does that happen for anybody? I see this all the time where it's almost impossible to really scout that position. You can't see. No one was able to really look at you in the dirt at Flemington and see that leadership quality or that potential to be that guy you became. How does that happen?
I always tell everybody, look, I'm kind of the Forrest Gump of motorsports, right? Where sometimes you just end up in the right place at the right time, and you're challenged with something that you didn't even know you could do. And they always say that you don't really know what you can do until you have to do it. But I was very, very fortunate throughout my career to be around some fantastic people, and I mean some good local racers in New Jersey, like Gil Hearn and people like that, that had a lot of wisdom, but they were there. Richie Evans, and raced with a lot of those guys and watched them. And then my years at Roger Penske, Penske, you're when you grow up in the Penske culture, you're learning stuff you don't even know that you're learning it, right? And then through Jay Signori and IROC and all that had prepared me, and I went to try and go back racing, and I get hurt, and I got to get a job, and I didn't even want to be the crew chief. We had fun at Bill Davis's. I did not want to be the crew chief. I told Rick Hendrick the first day, and Rick will tell you this.
What did you want?
I wanted to be the chassis guy. I want to build cars and set the cars up. I told them they need to go hire Andy Petrie to be the crew chief, and Rick says, no, we're going to hire you to be the crew chief. Jeff wants you to be the crew chief. I said, I don't know how to be a crew chief. I've never been a crew chief. Hire Andy Petrie. And he said, no, you're going to be the crew chief. I said, I don't want to be the crew chief. He said, well, that's the only job we got. take it or leave it.
No
Yeah, I was not. But that you ask about that, and it's because Rick saw way more in me than I saw in myself.
Yeah.
Like he said, look.
When you go to the first race, right, or the test or whatever, right, and you're in that position, I mean, you've been in this job for a few months now, but are you, from the outside looking in, you seem to be, you fit the mold, you fit the template, the crew chief template, but inside, are you
scared to death? My finger used to shake like that when I went to push the radio button. I was like, ugh. I was scared to death. But as a leader, you've got to exude confidence.
Right.
If you don't exude confidence, the team's not confident, the driver's not confident.
How did you figure that out?
I read a lot of coaching books, Vince Lombardi, and I honestly read Gibbs, but I would watch films, and then we would record, like I would listen to what other crew chiefs said and watch how people did, and we studied and studied.
Who did you pull from?
From crew chief side of things? Jeff Hammond, because Jeff Hammond was one of the best guys that you could talk to on the radio. Jimmy Fennig helped me a lot. Robin Pemberton, Tony Glover, Andy Petrie, all those guys got behind me and taught me a lot. And we used to scan and, of course, everybody's radios, and I would have a deal hooked on my radio where I could record what they were saying. Hey, Andy and I had our own channel between the two of us when he was crew chief for your dad.
And y'all would talk amongst each other?
We'd talk amongst ourselves. Yep.
Bull.
That's the truth. Yeah.
How long did that happen?
It went on for 2 years, and then Andy, went and got his own team, and I think we did it for one more year when he had Schrader. But
no kidding.
100%. You ask Andy. We had the 3 and the 24 were almost their own little teammates.
No one's going to believe that.
That's true. That's 100% true.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. I'd talk to Andy on the box about pitting, and he'd talk to me about this and that. There was a time in Charlotte, 1994, October at Charlotte, I built the shocks for the 3-car.
Bullshit.
That's true. 100. I was a crew chief on the 24 and built a set of shocks for the 3-car.
Unreal. And then obviously y'all, I think that's Jeff's rookie year, right?
No, 93 was our
93
rookie
was
year.
your
But 94 we weren't going to win the championship, and I think your dad was in the battle with Mark or somebody, and we were like, okay, well here.
No kidding. Unbelievable. So that's a great thing to segue to, because I know by talking to you, you really had a great opinion of my dad, and y'all had a very, very cool level of respect. You asked for a uniform to drive your, race your modified a little bit, and he gives you this IROC uniform, and you've given me that uniform here recently, and I'm very thankful. There was a moment though, shortly after you built those shocks, that Jeff does become a championship contender. How do you shut off that, or how do you balance sort of that relationship and respect and you know this guy, right? You appreciate Dad, you like him, and y'all are friendly, but then once Jeff becomes a winner, the competitiveness and maybe even the friendliness kind of gets a little chilly at times. How did you balance that? It
wasn't that easy emotionally, but professionally, we always got along. We didn't try and do each other, dirty. Andy and I got along, and a ton of respect for Richard Childress and that organization. Jeff and your daddy, they'd run into one another quite a bit on the racetrack, even in practice and stuff, but that was up to them, But with me, it was difficult, because, again, it happened so fast. Like, here was a guy who was my hero, on IROC and all that stuff. And he'd watch me run my modified at Wilkesboro and things like that. And then, man, you got to race this guy. But you also know that if you're going to be great, you got to go through this, because there was no way to win that championship other than going through a 3-car.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And it was difficult for me sometimes to be as big a fan I was of your dad's and focus on my job. But I also knew that I had a responsibility to Rick Hendrick, to Jeff Gordon, and your dad in some way would respect me more if we could go toe to toe with him.
Right.
Right. Like if I could if I could get his respect that way, he probably didn't like it on the days that we beat him, but I know that he respected my ability with the car, and through all that stuff, we only had one little run in. He threatened to whip my ass one time after Bristol, and we had a good talk up in the holler there.
What happened?
Pretty good. Jeff and him had tangled at Bristol, and I was mad, just being a fool, just stupid, and I run up in the 3-car truck, and he was gone already, and yelled at his crew chief, and they told him about it. So the next week, I think we were Darlington, but you know how 1 and 2 used to park in the garage next to one another.
Yeah,
so he comes walking out there, and he used to, how he'd get in our car, he'd walk up the side where everybody else kind of climbed in the window. Well, he just throws his leg over the thing. He just throws one leg over and get in the thing, sit on the door, and he looked at the door, and he says to me, I want to see you after practice. And I thought to myself, right? So after practice, I went back. I back up in the truck and whatever, and Richard Childers pops his head out of the back of the 3 truck, and he says, Dale wants to see you. And I was like, now I'm thinking to myself, man, I know what this is about, right? So I walk in there, and I had 2 shocks in my hand. And he walks in, he goes, you hit me with them shocks? And I said, I will if I have to. And he said, and he gives me a good talking to about, you don't ever run in my truck yelling at my people, you come and see me. And I said to him, and I thought, okay, this is a big turning point for me. Because if I just, yes, sir, and I sit down like a whooped dog, he's not ever going to respect me.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, sir. But I said, I did come to see you. You weren't there. Shouldn't have yelled at them people. I said, but if you got a problem with Jeff, take it out with Jeff. Don't run into my car on the racetrack, because my guys have got to fix that thing. And, what happened at Bristol just didn't need to happen. Don't remember the exact words. And he looked at me and said, all right, sit down. We sat down and talked about, that's when he was looking at hiring Steve Park and stuff like that. But that day, again, you think about, you're sitting there, I was ready to throw up, right? I was ready to throw up. But I thought to myself, if I don't stand up and answer him like a man, he's never going to respect me.
Man, pretty cool. Jeff Gordon credits you with a lot of safety innovations. You obviously, like a lot of racers, myself included, you've had your experiences with crashes and your own injuries, and Jeff says that all of that experience in your own career, even working on cars, other people's cars, you brought a lot of new innovation into his race cars that he credits with prolonging his career and success. Are there specific safety innovations that you championed or brought to the table?
Well, I always tell everybody, that's how I got to be a good fabricator, mechanic and stuff, because I wasn't a very good driver and just wrecked a lot of shit, right? So that's just not good. When I saw Jeff Gordon drive, I thought, man, if I could build a car that good, I must be just a terrible driver, But back in the early days, and again, learned a lot of this stuff. I was very fortunate. When you look at the champions that I worked with at IROC, the Andretti's, the Foyts, the Unsers, guys outside of NASCAR, because IndyCar was a little bit ahead of safety-wise, with the speeds and what they were running. Get to know some of those guys and talked about belts, and talked about seats, and talked about different things. So, we always tried to have best we knew how, the seats and leg supports, shoulder supports, and head supports, things like that in Jeff's car. But we also, I think one of the biggest things that we came up with, and Gary Aker was heavily involved in this, started to understand Jeff's voice would change, his attitude would change when we were at Martinsville. And we realized that the carbon monoxide was really getting to these guys. Wow. And came up with this carbon monoxide scrubber. And I think a lot of the guys are using that fresh air system and stuff now. I always thought about things like fire because of that fire that we had at Martinsville. I remember seeing guys, like Darrell, Davey, when the roofs come off the cars and hands out. So we started running roof nets and things like that, keep hands inside the car. So wherever I saw a problem, I tried to think, the worst thing could ever happen to me is if I built a car somebody got hurt in. Yeah. That's a horrible feeling. I remember with first IROC car, welded all seats and belts and all that stuff. Neil Bonnet goes 20 feet in the air at Talladega. Scared to hell of me. I thought to myself. Then I realized right then and there, if I'm responsible for this car, I'm responsible for that man's safety. Yeah. And I always tried to think about that.
Back in the IROC days, you'd have guys that would come race from different forms of motorsport that actually maybe not had ever sitting in that type of seat before or that type of harness, right? How challenging was that to get those guys comfortable in a seat and not only just, not talking about the specific car itself, the vehicle, but like the seat, the belts. I'm certain that, well, albeit similar, it's different from maybe the IndyCar seat and how they're used to those things working in the harness they had. Did you have guys that were like, that would ever look at the seat and the belts and stuff and go, man, is that all we got? Or, that's so different. Were they, being so different from what they're used to?
Yeah, quite a lot, and we try and do something different for them, but, build a frame for it. We sometimes would just kind of either build or repair a seat, cut a seat, do something right then, but they were kind of, didn't have a lot of time to fit them in there, but it was funny. A lot of those guys would come in and to be like, what, and then they'd go, well, I need a smaller steering wheel. You got to get me a smaller steering wheel. So you get them a smaller steering wheel. They go out and practice, they come in and say, hey, give me that,
the big steering wheel back.
Yeah. But, they all drove so different, that was the key. And you look at guys. There were only a few guys that could do all the stuff. Your dad figured those cars out. Mark Martin figured them out. But Dale Earnhardt Jr. was the guy that could figure out everything. He was the guy. I was
going to ask you. So you've seen a lot of different guys come into the IROC series back in the day. Who was the one that stood out that you thought, man, this guy could be a stock car racer in NASCAR? That was Al Jr.
Yeah, I think Al Jr. did a really, really good job understanding the car. From driving the IndyCar, so different, right? So different. But he understood that stock car, and he understood what that radial tire did, what to get on it, off it, all of that. And he understood the air. And that's something I couldn't figure out how he figured that out pretty quick.
Yeah. I remember when they came, he came and ran Daytona in a Hendrick car. Where you were. Yeah. So he's Valvoline, number 46. It's a huge deal. This, not only is it an IndyCar driver coming in to run our sport, which rarely happened, it's an unser. And even as a child or even as a young boy, I guess I was maybe 20 or so, 19, 20 then, I was so hopeful for his success. I personally wanted him to come race stock cars because he's an unser.
Yeah. And
he's Al Jr. And I wanted that to go well for him. Do you remember much about that experience? We know the result. He had some, moments of promise, and you could see where the potential was had he stuck with it. But do you remember like the excitement, I guess, around Hendrick Motorsports? It was rare when that type of thing would happen inside an organization. How was the buzz inside the building with Al Jr. coming to drive a one-off?
Well, it was really, I think, a lot of fun. I think Waddell might have run that car for him. And so it was, again, really neat. And things like that happen at Hendrick Motorsports because the stars want to come there. If people, everything aligns, they get it done. But I had worked with Al so much at IROC. I was excited to see him come because I knew he could do it if he wanted to stay doing it. I also knew it was going to be tough at Daytona 500. I wasn't involved a lot because I can't remember if that was our rookie year or it was either 93 or 94.
Right.
It was early.
Yep.
So we were, heck, I was trying to figure it out myself. All of a sudden having to work on the car where the fenders were important was pretty new to me, because at IROC they had fenders, but everything was the same, but we were still learning all that. But I got to spend time with Al when he came through there, and that's, I was fortunate enough to know a lot of superstars that were at Hendrick, like Waddell. And, your granddaddy used to come down and see me, and he had a lot of wisdom about stuff. And he was the guy I'd ask about questions on the body.
Yes.
How's this work? How's that work? Or why do you do this? Or why do you do that? As everybody else in the sport did at that time. But, when you look back at, again, I keep saying the Forrest Gump of motorsports because here I am, this guy, but I get thrown into this thing where you can't find better people to ask that are the people that were lined up to help me because Rick Hendrick said so.
You talk about Waddell. Waddell's a guy that I'm trying to get on the show here this year. He has an incredible career. What was it like working with him? What kind of character was he?
He's still a character today, and he's sharp. And when he's on, you got to get him telling about the stories how he didn't, he almost didn't get hired at Holman Moody and whatnot. But they had very little to work with compared to what we had, right? And they worked. Those guys worked. I mean, to work 18 hours a day was nothing back then. But you realize guys were geniuses like Smokey Unick, Banjo Matthews, guys like that never, no real schooling, no engineering, any of that, just figuring stuff out. Waddell's one of them guys. I mean, he look at something and it comes to him.
And so in my mind, I always imagined Waddell as more of a motor guy, a power guy. Apparently he was not that. I never really personally, internally credited his ability as a crew chief outside of the engine and power, right? So where was his expertise?
To me, his expertise will always be motor builder, because when you look at the number of races he's won and the people that he had him, like he'd have 3 or 4 motors in Daytona 500 and run them 1, 2, 3 when he was at Holman Moody. But he was really good about putting people together too. His management, leadership, dispersing the responsibility. And the other thing that I learned from watching him at Hendrick, his cleanliness and organization, because that actually gets in the head of your competition. When your stuff's clean and neat and organized, you already have that appearance of you're buttoned up, and if they're not even a little bit, they're already behind. And his shop, his cars, his people, his uniforms, if you look at him today, he's always buttoned up.
Man. You're credited by Jeff as well, not only for the safety innovations that you brought to his car, but the pit stop evolution. A lot of people, Jeff will say that you were one of the first guys to start considering the idea of athletes doing this job. Like it makes perfect sense today, but for the first 50 or 60 years of NASCAR, the road guys pitted the car, and you wanted, your crew chief, all your mechanics, those were the guys that were going to change the tires for the car when it came down pit road. But eventually, you're exhausting all these avenues of finding an advantage, and you found a new one, right, on pit road. And you were able to cut 5 seconds off of your pit stops by installing, trained athletes in these positions.
Well, the leaders of the pit stop to me will always be the Wood brothers. The Pettys and the Wood brothers, they got that stuff early. And, again, when we talk about history, you look back at Dale Earnhardt and Leonard Wood. They are who they are for a reason. And all we did was take their ideas and try and improve on them. And we had so much to do that I thought to myself, there's no way we can build a good pit crew and practice when I'm working these guys 16 hours a day already on the car. So I came up with the idea, and at first it wasn't well received at
I was going to ask.
No,
what was the pushback?
Jim Johnson, who was the general manager there. I mean, obviously he had budget, and people you couldn't have extra people and whatnot. So we went out and got some volunteers and bought them sandwiches and this and that, and found some Andy Papathanassiou, found some guys. And one day Rick Hendrick rolls in there, and he comes rolling in. Rick would just roll in on Saturday, check his stuff, and they're out there running around the field, rolling on tires, carrying one another in the back, and he's like, "What the hell's going on here?" So I explained to him what we were doing, and then he supported us. And I said, they don't need to know how to work on the car. Because that back then you could only have 7 men over at one time, but they could go back and forth, right? And I said, so if the car's wrecked, we'll send the other guys over, but we'll teach these guys how to do a pit stop. And he supported us, and again, he kept me from getting fired there. I think Jimmy wanted to fire me more than once, but the pit crew thing just made so much sense to me, and that helped us a lot, because we were pretty quick on pit road right off the bat. Yeah.
What about the pushback from the actual mechanics that were getting pulled off over the wall? Were they fine with that, or?
Well, since we didn't have a pit crew yet, I explained to some of the guys that wanted to change tires that, look, I need you here, and you're not going to have time to pit practice. And there were certain exceptions, like Chad Knaus. We'd let him out of the day. But Chad worked extra. Chad said, look, I'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'll do my own workout. Or can I do that? And I won't take lunch if you let me take an hour a day to go
continue pitting the car. Yeah. Yep. So there were some exceptions.
There were some exceptions, yeah.
So let's talk about let's talk about IROC. Actually, before we get there, I wanted to talk a little bit about the SRX. This is this is a series that's been going on for a couple of years. A lot of people were really excited about it. You'd have everybody. I don't know. By this point, there's probably different versions of what the series was, what it was supposed to be, what it became in a very quick period of time. But you had a lot of guys, current drivers, older drivers, retired drivers, out there racing in a very short field, 12 cars, reminiscent of the old original IROC series, done on short tracks, a little bit more of a budgeted sort of style event, and made for TV. When you started SRX, when the series is really kind of being built, are you the mastermind, or are you feeling more of a partner? How much real control, creative control out of the gate did you have?
Well, the first year, I was the creative control, right? Yeah. I designed the cars, right down to drawing the bodies, worked with Tony Uri and the folks over at Fury, taking one of their chassis and modifying it. But the actual look of the car, the race, the television format, really everything, the look of all that stuff. So I was pretty much the creative control, running the competition side, and then partners from New York, Sandy Montag was TV, and George Pine was hunting up sponsorship and bringing in investors. But as far as track format, choices, drivers, all of that stuff, did all that and loved it. It was amazing, right down to the point where I would sit with Pam Miller and do the minute-by-minute TV stuff, hands and everything. And when I designed that series, I wanted it to be a mini IROC for drivers that, again, guys like you and Jeff and Tony, guys that are retiring from the sport younger and younger, but didn't really want to race, but wouldn't mind doing something like that. It was safer and have a little bit of fun, and made it, a special, a motorsports entertainment made for TV type series. Yeah.
Did you when determining the tracks you were going to go to, was that your goal out of the gate, is to go to these local short tracks and find these local audiences? Did you ever think, about, IROC would go to Michigan. IROC was a companion event to a NASCAR weekend. Was there ever like an even early onset, like very early thoughts about where it was going to physically go?
Yeah. I wanted to keep it, on a smaller track, because of the speeds. We wanted to make sure, that I just didn't want these guys running 180 miles an hour. They didn't need to be at Talladega and Daytona, but they could have easily been, at Martinsville or the dirt track at Charlotte. We absolutely looked at stuff like that, or maybe shorten up a road course, not run the whole, the whole big track, somewhere, maybe, shorter version of Sonoma or somewhere. And would have seen that be a companion event to NASCAR, and had conversations with IndyCar and people like that. So I feel like we were on our way with that.
So, the series was well received. Fans, I paid a lot of attention to that, and fans really loved the alternative that it was. And it seemed like that was it kept that sort of reputation all the way to the very end. And people were disappointed to see it go away. But talk to me about how it evolved. And you eventually, removed yourself from it entirely, right? And so I got to know, right, what was going on, and why did you make those decisions?
Well, as with anything, there's partnerships, right? And when you have a dream and you all agree this is the direction this is going to go on, and this is the funding that it's going to take to do it. Here's my job, here's your job, and here's his job, right? And at the end of the year, when there's no moving forward, financially or things like that, you have to have a hard conversation with the partners. Like, wait a minute, this is what we agreed on. This is what I think it's going to take to be successful. And at that time, the other partners felt like it was going to take something else for it to be successful, or they could be successful a different way, and I didn't want to do that. So I said, okay, well, you probably need to have somebody else run this then, because I don't believe that path that you're going will be successful. And so I stepped aside, and unfortunately, it's not been successful, right? I mean, and the loser is the fan. Yeah. Right, the fans have lost, and because the idea was good. The drivers supported it. They did. The drivers supported it. They were having fun. They had all those things, but unfortunately, the business case or the business plan that they used was not successful.
There was a lot of interesting scenarios that popped up during this whole process. NASCAR wasn't entirely sure how to feel about SRX, and especially when the current drivers were going and competing there. I think that everybody, NASCAR included, loved the idea of Chase getting to race Bill and Ryan and Dave Blaney being able to compete together and the moments like that. But, someone just going to run to have a one-off or be a part of it was a bit questionable for some people in the industry. And so how was that a challenge at all? Trying to find a way to exist, not only coexist alongside NASCAR, but also you certainly want to be an asset. You don't want to be anything that's a deterrent to NASCAR. You want to be an asset to them in any way possible. And so, was that ever anything that made things difficult for SRX to succeed? Or was that just something you hoped? It was not a deterrent. It was not a problem. It was not a problem in the productivity of SRX, and you thought that eventually the two could coexist and actually work together.
Well, my plan never included running a bunch of current drivers.
Guys, yeah.
One, maybe two, right? Never really. That was never part of my plan. Okay, so that happened in year 2 and 3 after I left. I have. Still to this day, one of my proudest things is being a member of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, right? So, and I have a great relationship with the France family, with Mike Helton, with Steve Phelps, and all that group. And we had several conversations about SRX and about, hey, look, here's the lane. Here's what I'm doing with it. I'd like to use drivers once in a while. Same with the IndyCar people. But it was really about bringing in the superstars that weren't racing full-time anymore, and then mixing them with a local short track hero, which I think is really important. Local short track hero, and then a current star, from whether that's from road racing, Indy cars, sprint cars, whatever. And it got turned off a base there, and I can't really comment on whether that had any problem or not, but I can tell you that we worked hand in hand pretty good with NASCAR as we were doing it, and I have had, again, great conversations about where I plan on going with IROC, and as you know, that NASCAR now currently owns the historic sports car racing, and looking at how we can get these vintage IROC cars back on track, and then figure out where it goes from there. But I think once it got off to being again, a bunch of current Cup guys, it became something much different than I started it to be.
All right, so you step back, remove yourself entirely. Was it a slow process? Was that is it quick?
No, it was
like a light switch.
It was a pretty quick process. One of the things that as you know me, you've known me for a long time. Sometimes I say what's on my mind, say it pretty quick. That was basically a phone call where I'd given all I could give, and deep down when you give all you can give, and somebody's telling you that just ain't right. Well, I was like, well, you know what? You all have a nice day. I'm gonna go build old cars. Emotionally,
as you watch the SRX continue, emotionally, any challenge to watch it continue on down this other path and doing this?
Oh yeah, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't. It's like watching your old girlfriend. Going down a date with somebody else, and you keep thinking, man, that's not going to be good for you. But it was, and emotionally, it did bother me to see some of the changes that were made and some of the things that it was becoming that we had never intended it to do. And I watched some of the turns that they made, and I thought to myself, it's just not going to make it. And unfortunately, they didn't.
Do you think the SRX series ever returns?
Don't know. I know that I know that I think there's a place for a series like that if it's done properly and there's a business case. And that business case has to be really looked at. And I don't think you can go from point A to point D like a rocket ship, right? You got to go B, C, and so I think that there's 100% a place for something like what IROC was or SRX was, that is a form of motorsports entertainment, because the fans need to be entertained.
Yeah.
They need to be entertained.
That brings me to IROC. You announced last year that y'all had attained the rights to the IROC name, the brand, right?
Yeah.
What does
like
that
good-looking hat you're wearing.
Right. What does that even mean? Like, how does that look, I know that you worked in IROC years ago. I know you have a very, very personal connection to that. And I think the SRX was a version of that modern style of IROC that you had in your mind, right? When do you decide, hey, I wonder if I can attain the rights of the brand? I want to own that. When do you decide that?
Well, we actually looked at it when I started SRX. I really wanted to do that, and again, we were. It would have been a long process.
You wanted SRX just to be IROC.
I wanted SRX to be IROC.
And what was the problem?
Well, the other partners didn't think that was something they wanted to do because they wanted to create their own brand. Didn't feel like IROC was a big enough brand.
Wow!
And it was a little bit of, obviously it would have been a legal battle. And I've gotten to be friends with Rob Kaufman, who I think is, Rob's a sharp guy, and he does so many other car things. We do a lot of car things together. Rob's a car collector, like I'm a car collector, and we do like Amelia Island, a lot of these things together. And we were kidding around with that. So, man, I really like to get that. And Rob got involved, and Rob has legal people and trademarks and this and that. And one of the guys that helped us out a good bit was a guy named Bruce Canapa. I don't know if you know Bruce or not, but Bruce knew the guy that had the marks, and we were able to put a lot of things together to get the marks, and then we're lined up to get some more. So that gives us the right to use
some more?
That. So well, there's, as you're doing different trademarks, there's different, you can go in this category, and then you can go in this category and this category. So right now we have the category that we can put on racing, forms of racing, and obviously we can sell merchandise.
Okay.
Right? So we're working on those things, and those are all different categories. But we were able to get it, and right now I'm trying to gather as many vintage IROC cars as I can to put on a big IROC reunion. And people have been, you talk about positive, we have people with IROC Z Camaros, and I found about 35 vintage IROC cars already. Yeah. And those are just from the people I know. So hopefully they're going to be, we can have this big reunion. We're shooting for the fall, and then we're going to figure out, okay, wow, there's an interest in this thing, and where do we go from here? But our goal is to get those cars back on track, and then continue to see how popular it can get.
So do you see this version of do you see this as a bit of more of a historic meet and greet gather type, where you're going to have your own cars, other people that may have IROC cars, everybody comes together to enjoy the collections, but also have some track day style events? People are going to want to know, will we ever see IROC as we knew it again, where you've got cars out on a racetrack going 180 miles an hour with the best current drivers in all forms of motorsports competing together?
You're probably spot on for everything other than 180 miles an hour. I just don't feel like we need to be 180 miles an hour on a big track. I think we can go 150 on a small track and be bumper to bumper and put on good racing. Like you go and run your late model.
I mean, if I remember the IROC cars when I was driving them, they were down 15, 20 mile an hour from what a Cup car was doing around that racetrack. So, and I felt they were detuned, they were draggy, they were fun as hell. You had to drive the shit out of them, and I felt completely safe because I never felt like I was going anywhere near the speed I was going to go in my Cup car. Right. But so maybe 180 mile an hour is a bad term, but going to a mile or a mile and a half racetrack, right, and having the original IROC events. Is that are you basically like, look, we're going to start here, see where it goes. If that if that's a possibility, you would entertain having the original concept come back to life?
Oh my God, yeah. Then that's my dream. But as we talked about before, I want to make sure that I'm staying in my lane because I always want to be an asset, not only to NASCAR but to IndyCar, because again, those are our two American series, right? And you look at IMSA's getting really strong now too. I believe that there's a place for IROC, as I see it, to fit in with any of those. But I'll look you in the eye and tell you my dream IROC would be to be able to have this thing grow to have country against country compete, or something, like that, where this is this standard car that you get to design what people want, whether you've got them on the game or how do you get people involved from around the world, but then you really bring in, like, how cool would it be someday if let's just say, if you could see Lewis Hamilton and Joseph Newgarden race Kyle, Larson or somebody like that, but in a completely different thing. So that's a dream, right? But for right now, we're looking at, okay, how can I make the first step and find out if there's interest, create the business plan, and get other partners involved like NASCAR, IndyCar. Yeah,
I was wondering because I don't know, I hadn't really ever heard you say, okay, we all know that you're collecting the old cars. We all know that you want to kind of bring everybody who loves IROC and loves the heritage and all that together in one place and have a celebration of the history. But had never really heard you speak on it beyond that, right? And what the perfect world would be. I didn't know if you were hesitant to go that far to because you definitely don't want to. People would be like, "Oh man, well I'm excited about that. When's that going to happen?" Yeah. Right? Yeah. Now you set the tone, right? But I will say, anything that resembles the original IROC would be incredibly welcomed by NASCAR, IndyCar, all fans of every type of motorsport. I remember, and the one reason I think is because I remember when you'd walk into Michigan in the middle of the year. We personally are in the middle of this week-to-week grind in the NASCAR series, and you'd walk out on pit road, and there's Jim Sauter and Dave Marcus, and a couple of IndyCar guys and an F1 guy, and they're in your backyard.
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to race them, and it allowed this opportunity to interact with them. We would never see each other any other time during the calendar year. And now we're going to not only race together, but we're going to have conversations about, our careers and the cars and IROC and what they think about stock cars and what they think about where, our neck of the woods.
And sign stuff. I've seen drivers get autographs from other drivers in IROC.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And so that was the greatest thing about IROC. And I think that when you would watch Dad, before I became a driver in IROC, when you would watch Dad running that series and any other Cup driver, they enjoyed the opportunity to drive against these other racers that were great and experts in those disciplines. That everybody really enjoyed the competitiveness and the challenge and trying to compete against each other. You were never going to race each other in any other way. This was never going to happen any other way. And so I think that is what's special about IROC, is that it's the one unique way that you do get to see a Lewis Hamilton and a Kyle Larson on the track against each other.
I think that in this, what they say, what's old is new again. There were certain reasons as a motorsports changed that made IROC go away. Guys couldn't do this and this and that. But I think that we've come to a bit of a circle to we can do that. Yeah. And I think, as I said, there's a way of mixing the names that people want to see and doing it now. But I got to share one funny story about when you said Michigan and you were talking about your daddy again. Man, one time at Michigan, getting after practice, and we used to have all other cars lined up there, and by that time, it was Friday afternoon, I guess, and names would be on them and all that stuff, and they were all sitting there. Mm-hmm. And he comes up to me and he grabs me by the back of the neck. He says, "Man, I want to talk to you." So, okay. And I look, he's got on his IROC fire suit, and it's got all these damn Sharpie marks on by the belt. And he goes, "You see that?" He said, "Look at my spoiler wears." He'd gone up behind all the cars and leaned up against them and took his Sharpie, and his spoiler was about a 1/4 inch higher than the other car, and he'd marked them. And then he goes, and right here, and then he's got his driving shoe on there, and the lace, and one of the laces is marked. And then looking on his other foot, the other lace is marked. And he said, "And look here, my foot goes all the way up to this lace under my air dam and only goes onto this lace." And he'd been walking up and down pit road.
His car was too high.
His car was too high.
He's going to be slower. He was mad. Did you accommodate him?
Yeah. Well, I told, it used to be tough, but, I'd have to go to Jay and say, "Hey, Jay, we need to let that Earnhardt's car down a little bit. It's about a 1/4 inch high in the front. We'll need to let it down the back a little bit too." So we do that.
Did you?
The only thing I had. What's that?
Did you go back? Did you go check before you make sure he wasn't lying?
Oh, yeah.
He was tricky.
I would make sure. Yeah. But
he was a trickster.
Well, the only time I ever had to chase him, before that on pit road there, they'd all be gone. And you had to keep an eye on him because he'd be over by his right front tire. He'd be letting air out of the right front tire, because them things used to push so bad.
Yeah.
Letting a little out of it. But it was it was fun to work with him. And let me tell you, some of those other guys were pretty competitive too. Had some good IROC stories. The guys would take it in the garage and it'd get heated in there sometime.
Yeah.
Bobby Rahal and Terry Labonte almost got into it one time. I remember
what
having
happened?
To separate them. I guess I don't know if Bobby spun Terry or Terry spun Bobby, but they were face to face. We had to separate them.
You don't see Terry too hot.
No, but boy, when he does get away from him. And I remember Cale Yarborough one time, one of the it was either Hans Stuck or Jochen Moss spun him out. We were at Mid Ohio. Man, we get out, and how Cal used to be, his face would get red, really red. He comes running up to me, and he grabs me, says, "Where's them Germans?" Just like that. I said, "Germans." He goes up there, and he runs up there, and he grabs him, and he's pointing, and the Germans are like, no, it was him. No, it was him. So,
that's funny. I want to transition quite a bit, so we're going to make a big shift here, but want to move into some current things going on in the sport. Big conversation around charters. You were a car owner. I'm sure you have, you stayed on top of what's going on between NASCAR and the teams. And I don't have any skin in the game, right? In this particular situation, I'm not pulling for either side. And there's no benefit to me one way or the other, however it works out. I find it very fascinating to see the sport in this position. I want it to end well. Right. I obviously don't want anything bad to happen that's a stain on our sport. You have been an owner in the series, and you obviously have some close connections to HMS. What do you think is the eventual solution and resolution? Where do you think this is going to go?
That's hard to predict, right? As stuff evolves, when I keep talking about evolution, that it's time and it's business and sports now, because of the value of to TV, to streaming, to whatever. Really, live sports is probably the most valuable thing on all of television right now. So as that's evolved, and the NFL's gotten bigger, and they're the example. What's the right thing to do? Is NASCAR always going to be NASCAR, or is that someday going to get sold to a big media company, kind of like the Formula One company? So as all that evolves, and you can only hope that with all of the really, really smart business people involved, that they take their time and they try and figure it out, so make sure that the loser isn't the fans, right? Yeah. We don't want the fans to be the loser. I know that I believe that some of the cost containment that they've done with the new car and some of those things are definitely in the right direction. I will also tell you that I don't believe that guys like Roger Penske and Rick Hendrick are probably able to keep things going without some of the connections that they have business to business
right.
with people. I believe Jeff when he says, look, they haven't made money in a long time. Rick does it a lot of passion. So there's got to be some business change to make that a viable business, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not privy to the numbers and the tracks, the this, the that, but if everybody really wants to have that old, hey, a good deal is a good deal for everybody, that's fair, it'll work, right? But if one side or the other is too greedy, I think the only one that's going to get hurt is the fans again. No different than when we've seen things split with, whether that's IndyCar, or, even Formula One had a rough time for a while, but it is a critical time for sure. But what we don't want to have, and I know you don't want this either, is 3 or 4 cars running up front and everybody else just getting past, right?
I find it pretty fascinating that, I feel like that a lot of the investors at 2311, having experience in sports outside of NASCAR, came in and they saw this business model and they went, wow, this is different. It's how we've always done it. I think, 5 years ago, before 2311, the teams would have probably agreed to a similar deal that they're being offered today, but you have a lot of new people in the ownership side of it that have experience outside of NASCAR and other forms of sport going, this is not a good model for the teams. This model needs to change drastically. One of the things that's being asked from NASCAR is that the charters become permanent. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't know where I feel, how I feel about that. I think if you spend $40 million for one, you'd like to think that it's yours forever. You being an owner and thinking, imagining what it would have been like to have had the charters back then, all that investment that you made to start your team with Dodge, wouldn't you want that charter to be yours?
Yeah, I mean, I would. When I look at it, and we talk about 2311 coming in, and even all the way back to when Rob Kaufman and those people come in. If our sport's going to continue to grow, right, it's going to have to attract the big money, and a lot of these people that are involved have been on the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball. Yeah. They see things in a different light. So that's, as I talk about that evolution, our sport's amazing. The history of our sport's amazing, but it's also business-wise gotten so big, it's got to evolve. And if you are looking at the most successful, okay, if the NFL is the big, here in America, that's the big dog, right? Those franchises are permanent.
I agree.
When you look at Formula One, which is right now the most successful form of motorsports in the world, those franchises are permanent. So I feel like at some point, NASCAR's got to say, all right, we've got back to 43 permanent franchises, and this is where they're at. Yeah.
I hope, the one thing that's tough for me to understand, though, when I look at it, and this isn't really a NASCAR or a team position, but the charter's selling for $40 million, right? They just
I should have hung on to my team.
Yeah, I could have bought charters for $2 million just a few years ago from BK Racing. They were available for anyone. So with the increase in value, what's wrong with the business model if the value in the charter's going up so much? It makes me feel like that there is some value. There is some, if it can sell for $40 million, this isn't a worthless, thing to own.
No, it's definitely not. And again, I don't have all of the numbers, but
nor do
I'm just sitting here and say, okay, look, I get you, but I look at it like, man, it's got this nice condo in Florida, and it's got some equity in it now, and you're like, man, I should sell that, but if I sell it, then I can't buy another one. So now, in the end, that charter really only has value if you're going to borrow against it or if you're going to sell it. Yeah. Right. So, but the business model of keeping your team in place, suppose so you're not taking a couple $1 million a year or out of your own pocket. I think that that has something that's got to be looked at. But again, not knowing what the true numbers are, unless those guys will come in here and open up their books, I don't know that we'll ever know.
There needs to be all right, for a person like myself, like is it okay that the charters will become like you can always anyone can walk in this door and say, look, man, you had your chance, you blew it, right? You didn't get in when it was affordable, right? It's no longer affordable for me. Now it is affordable for a guy who makes hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, right? So is that the market for the car owner that we have going forward? The billionaires, the multimillionaires that are gonna be able to afford to buy that charter. So someone like me who's raced in this sport forever, the door and the opportunity to go through that door and become a full-time competitor in the Cup Series seems to have disappeared. So I can only get in unless if I buy a $40 million charter. 20 years ago, I would just build a car and go.
Yeah. Well, and maybe they keep, a couple of spots open for somebody that wants to be in there. I think that's a good idea
maybe.
Too. But that as I talk about the evolution, whether we like it or not, that's the reality of where sports is right now to go. If you were a football player or baseball player, basketball player, you'd be facing the same thing. You'd have to go start yourself a high-tech company, become a billionaire, and buy a basketball team, go play. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but it is the reality of where the evolution of the upper games are. I think that these private equity groups or big companies are going to own those things, and unfortunately, there'd be guys like me that would be general managers or what it is.
Yeah.
It's out of our reach right now, and to stay healthy, to be able to grow, I think that's going to have to follow that path.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so you've been an advisor at HMS. Are you still in that same role, or what involvement, if any involvement, do you have at the NASCAR level, at the elite top level?
I don't really have, other than being a member of the Hall of Fame and being a good friends with Jeff and Rick and some people. I don't have any any official duties anymore. They know that. I help with some of the PR stuff and doing,
Sure.
with this 40th anniversary and whatever, but really nothing on the NASCAR level anymore. I'm actually on the I guess you'd call it the appellate board for IndyCar racing. So if somebody gets in trouble there, I get to sit on that. And I asked Jay Fry if he brought me in there just because I'd been up in front of the NASCAR board so many times.
Seeing how it went.
But no, really. Gonna put as much focus as I can on this IROC thing for the next bit and see where it goes.
Right on. All right, who wins the championship this year?
Oh boy, you know me. I'm going to go with the Daytona 500 winner because he's maturing, and I said, man, when that kid gets some time and some maturity, and he seems to really like his crew chief Rudy, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump right on the bandwagon right now and say this Williams going to bring it home. And plus, I like the number on that car.
Yeah, William Byron. He's he had a really good run last year. Starts the season off strong with a big win, and I think every big milestone, you may be able to help me with this. As you and Jeff achieve these massive milestones, winning the first 600 at Charlotte and going into winning Daytona and Indy, the confidence you get from those moments are far exceed winning a race at Rockingham, or nothing to discount those wins. But when you check big boxes like the Daytona 500, it changes you as a driver. People were saying, I saw Bob Pockers and them saying, is it time to put more respect on Williams' name? I mean, the guy won 6 races last year, was a favorite going into the championship, might have been the favorite for the championship 4 there in Phoenix. I think there's plenty of respect on his name. But now he's a Daytona 500 champion and maturing at a rapid pace. So I think it's a great pick. Next big innovation in NASCAR. When you look at the sport, what is the next thing that you think changes and has a big impact on the sport? We've had the next-gen car come in. We may have some new manufacturers coming in. We've heard that for a decade now, but there seems to be some more talk about that. But what's the next thing that changes?
Well, I'll tell you what I'd like to see change. I don't know if it's gonna.
That was my question.
Yeah,
my next
I don't
question.
know.
You're the CEO. You're the CEO for a day.
Okay.
You got the reins. What are you doing?
I'll be sitting in there like Bill Jr. used to be right now and saying, boys, we've got to figure out a way to get these cars to stop wrecking when they're pushing.
Yeah.
We can't stop. We got to figure out how we can do that, and we also got to figure out a way to get it more back on the people at the speedway racing. When I was sitting there thinking, man, tell me the Daytona 500 is a fuel strategy race.
Right.
It used to be handling, right?
Yes.
Strategy like that. So how do we? I'd be challenging everybody at the table today. Say, look, I need two things from you guys. I need to figure out a way that we can stop these cars from being out of control when they're pushing like that, and how can we give a few more tools back to the crew chief and the driver to make their cars more suited to them?
Yeah, I agree with that. I like that. I was sitting there watching the Daytona 500, and after the first accident, they ran 2x2 for 40 laps. Like no movement whatsoever in the entire field. And I couldn't believe. It was like it was orchestrated so perfectly. There was nothing else happening. No lead. Nobody was breaking free in the lead. I was like, what is going on? And, it goes to the fuel mileage, and they were put in that situation because of the yellow flags falling at a unique time. But, that the racing to fuel mileage and running the race backwards like you do at a road course, it has become much more prominent at a lot of different racetracks that we go to. But yeah, I agree with you. I was sitting there watching that Daytona 500, had the exact same opinions and thoughts about, man, we got to get the cars to where they're handling. They're chasing them up the track. They're lifting. They're, somebody's car drives better, they drive away.
Yeah.
Not this all stuck on top of each other and crescendoing into a big crash as we get to the end of a stage or ultimately the end of the race is not a lot of fun.
What
right?
if I'd have said to you back, if I was your crew chief and I said, hey, I need you to run 52% throttle, you'd be like, what, dude? I'm at Daytona.
Yeah.
I got to be on the ground.
Yeah.
Boom.
Right.
It's again, there's certain parts of evolution you're not going to change, but we need to be thinking about directing some of that, because when I buy a ticket, I want to see the athlete perform.
Yeah.
I want to see the athlete perform. I don't want to see the car perform.
Yeah.
I don't want to see the computer perform. I come to watch you drive.
Yeah.
I come to watch Jeff drive. And we need to get it back in those hands a little bit.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you coming and joining us today. Excited about the book. Hopefully you're getting some great feedback on the book so far.
I'm sure I'm going to get some good stuff and some bad stuff, but I don't have to tell you. When you write a book, it's like you put yourself out there, and I did the very best I could to tell the truth and to really think about what I was feeling. I might have exaggerated here and there, back when I was running modifieds, talking about how good I was or something like that. But other than that, it was really about how I feel like I have changed as a person, and that's a tribute to all of the people who helped me along the way. And they don't even know they helped me, but I want them to know that they helped me. Yeah.
Well, if you're a race fan and certainly if you follow Jeff Gordon's career and Ray's career, Trophies and Scars, Ray Evernham, it's a great book. A lot of great books coming out this year. You want to have this one. You want to read it. You want to understand all the things that went on in Ray's career. Great job by that. Great job on that book, and hopefully you get a lot of great feedback. And I know that when, in my experience, being able to put that truth out there really was a relief. And then the response from it, to your point, a lot of people that may not have understood your decisions now knowing what was in your mind, it's extremely helpful to sort of put some things to bed and move forward in life. So hopefully that's the experience you have, Ray. We're wishing you the best.
Thank you, man. Really appreciate your time. You got to come see my IROC cars someday.
I need to, man. I'd love to. Hey, before you leave, what is the next car you're looking to find? What's the one out there that's missing? Is there a car that you're looking for? You don't know where it is? You'd love to have it?
Oh, man, I'm going to tell you what. There's a bunch of cars out there, but I've been so wrapped up in this IROC stuff. I'm looking at there's still some IROC Generation 1 Camaros,
yes.
Generation 2 Camaros that have not been found. And when I say that, it's IROC generation, so 74 to 76, I think, was first gen. But those cars, those 77 to 80 cars, man, they're the ones that I really like.
Yeah, they were good looking, man. That was like a stock bodied Camaro. Well, hopefully, maybe somebody will hear this podcast and steer you toward one. And get you what you're looking for, buddy. Appreciate you, Ray. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Ray Evernham on the Dale Jr. Download. Man, that was a great conversation with Ray. There's some good nuggets in there. The story about Dad's team and his team having the crew chiefs having a one-way single radio channel to talk during races is something I'd never heard before. And also hearing his vision for IROC. I think he's certainly, that's a massive vision. That's ambitious to think that there would ever be any kind of version of the original IROC. I really don't know if that's possible in this day and age. Ray, open-minded to it, thinks there is a way forward to get there. And I think we're all pulling for that to happen. So either way, I love the fact that he restores some NASCAR history and stock car history. He's always been a big proponent of that, and that's really what's brought me and him together over the last several years was our passion for the history and the physical history of the cars and so forth. I have a car, maybe more than one, in my junkyard that Ray gave me out of his own personal collection. It was a car that's crashed really hard at Daytona. It's not a car that we would restore. But he's like, hey, do you want this? I'm like, great addition to the graveyard. So, I didn't know Ray at all really up until I started, racing at Hendrick Motorsports, and Ray talked about coming in as an advisor around the 2014 season. Now Ray's sitting in our competition meetings at a table similar to this, and I got to really get to know him, really talk to him for the first time. And I didn't expect us to become friends because I looked up to him and didn't think that he would have any interest in having any kind of friendship with me because of where he was in his life and all the things that he was involved in and what he'd accomplished. But we became friends, and I'm thankful for that. So it was great to have him back on. Great show. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you again, Ally. No matter what you're saving for, whether it's race tickets, whether you're going to buy a car or even a house, we're all better off with an Ally, and Ally's going to set us straight and on the path forward. So thank you again, Ally, for everything you do for us here at Dirty Mo Media and everything you do in the NASCAR industry. You're a great partner for all of us. So thank you. Y'all have a great week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.